History.
We shall never surrender.
Politics.
Where there is discord, may we bring harmony.
Current affairs.
Going to Pizza Express in Woking is an unusual thing for me to do.
Conspiracies.
Ask not what your country can do for you.
We'll stop terrorists from coming after us.
I just received a beautiful letter from Kim Jong-un.
It concludes that Iraq has chemical and biological weapons.
I'm not guilty of harassing anyone.
Well, I'm not a crook.
This is the Political Darkside Podcast. And now, here's your host, Matthew Howland.
If you only knew the power of the dark side.
Welcome to episode 21 of the Political Darkside podcast. As always, please remember to follow the show on the social medias, donate through the Buy Me a Coffee link, subscribe and review through whichever outlet you're currently enjoying this on, and of course, share it with friends. This is going to be a topic I've wanted to cover for a while now, and hopefully I will be presenting two guests who are familiar with one another. If possible, Lois Perry will be joining us at some point. Joining me now, though, to guide me through the climate debate, I have sought the knowledge of podcaster Tom Nelson, all the way from Minnesota in the north of the United States, just on the border with Canada, so I'm sure he'll appreciate the cold we're currently experiencing in Scotland. Mr. Nelson, how are you, sir?
Doing fine. How about yourself?
Yeah, good. Just half froze to death walking my dogs about 20 minutes ago, but such as Scotland, I think it's actually north of Moscow. On the
is it?
Yeah, on the grid lines. So I shouldn't be surprised that it's cold in January, but we've been told we're having global warming, so I'm still waiting for it to benefit here.
Not Clearly too hot outside yet there, huh?
No, sadly not. What about you?
Yeah, we have a lot of snow on the ground here. It's just a typical winter here in Minnesota. I ran the snowblower this morning again. So I heard that Duluth, Minnesota had the snowiest start to winter on record, actually, as of about 3 weeks ago. So plenty of snow falling, lots of places.
Yeah, it's a shame we've not got any tropical climate yet, unfortunately. Right, I'll dive right in anyway. So there's an old expression that I would use to describe myself, and it's a jack of all trades, master of none. Which I think is applicable to my areas of interest. Certainly, if you look back through my previous episodes and the content I've put out there, ranging from JFK to bunkers, there's no consistency. It's just interest in things. And I'm certainly interested in this. The climate crisis does fit neatly into like a modern, broader agenda, which I've touched on recently, the World Economic Forum, depopulation, this sort of business. So it's been on my radar for some time. My question for you is, why the climate crisis? Why is this your hill to die on?
That's an interesting question. I've been involved in it in this debate for maybe 15 years or so, and it just has always interested me. I don't know if you want to hear about my backstory with this ivory-billed woodpecker thing. That's how I really got involved into looking at scientific controversies. So this was around 2005, and Cornell announced that they had rediscovered this ivory-billed woodpecker. It was a huge deal and got a lot of publicity. And I was a bird watcher and still am. And I just dove into that controversy. And they had 17 authors on this paper saying, hey, we discovered this bird. And they had a video and everything. And it was all bunk. It was all hogwash. They never saw it. And through the course of maybe a year and a half, a lot of people on my blog, a lot of commenters on my blog and me just tore apart the evidence. So they had a blurry video and they had a 6-pixel ivory bill. They literally had 6 pixels, and that was supposed to be proof that they saw this endangered or this extinct bird. It was a complete crock. It was just amazing that they could get this published in Science magazine, and Cornell announced it. The U.S. government was all behind it, and it was a complete crock. So I was involved in that. And then some guy emailed me and said, that this controversy looks like the climate change or global warming controversy, where the government's all in on it and it's a complete crock. So that got me looking at the climate change, global warming controversy. And I've been, since about then, I've been working on it almost daily. It's been really fun working on it. First, I was just on my blog, blogging about it. And now I've been mostly on Twitter. And then in the last maybe 6 months, I've been podcasting about it too.
Were you prior to the the bird incident, were you, like not conspiratorial minded, but were you open minded to things? Like, for example, let's say Iraq WMDs. Would you have been skeptical of that? Were you naturally skeptical of mainstream news anyway?
I am sorry to say I wasn't. I was pretty trusting in general. Around then, I thought, whatever, if Science Magazine said it, I believed it. I was just orders of magnitude more trusting then than I am now. Now I feel like I have to independently verify just about anything. So I've really changed since then.
Yeah, I mean, you can barely turn on the mainstream news without having to double take literally everything that you see, unfortunately. And then, you'll probably look back through things retrospectively and kind of wonder to yourself, what's the truth about X, Y, and Z incidents, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So your current position on, like, what is, could you outline your current position on the climate? I mean, for example, you believe in looking after the planet, not dumping plastics in the sea, keeping things clean, looking after the environment for animals, etc.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I'm a deer hunter and a bird watcher. I love nature. I've done a lot of camping, etc. So I don't think we should cut down all the trees and pave over everything. I think conserving land is fine. But on the climate change thing, I think the climate crisis is a complete crock. There's nothing wrong with our climate that hasn't also been wrong with it. And during every other day in human history, nothing wrong with it. The weather is not getting worse. The seas are rising a little bit, but they rose 400 feet in the last 200 centuries, an average of 2 feet per century. And now since 1870, they've risen maybe 8 inches or 9 inches. There's nothing unusual about the rate of sea level rise. We're in an interglacial and some of the glaciers are melting, but I think we should enjoy it while it lasts because I think we are going to see global cooling at some point. I don't know when, and I don't think anybody really understands it. But the big point is there's nothing wrong with Earth's climate. The Earth is for sure not too hot. And warm times have always been better for humans than cold times. So the whole idea that we want the little ice age to return, that we want global cooling is just completely insane. That warm times are better for growing plants or growing our crops. And the additional CO2 actually is helping our crops grow better. It's certainly not hurting our crops like we're led to believe.
Yeah, I mean, when I was young, I remember being taught that plants and humans are in a symbiotic relationship whereby they take our carbon output and process it into oxygen. And you don't actually hear that mentioned too often anymore. It's almost like it's a fact of the Earth's ecosystem that they just decide to not mention because it, convenient. It's inconvenient for it's an inconvenient truth, let's say.
Yeah, it's too positive of truth. Yeah, the whole idea that it's a pollutant, that CO2 is a pollutant, is preposterous. At the level of 400 parts per million is absolutely not a pollutant. If the air was 100% CO2, then of course we couldn't survive. But historically, or way back in time, there's been maybe 4,000 parts per million CO2 in the air, and life was doing fine then with 10 times as much CO2 as we have now. So from what I understand, I think we could burn as much fossil fuel as we want, and we would never be able to raise the level of CO2 on Earth to a dangerous level. So let's not worry about CO2. But,
yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed that the interview you did with Patrick Moore, the former president of Canadian Greenpeace. Not the space guy, for anyone who's thinking I'm talking about Sir Patrick Moore. I mean, he was saying that cold is the enemy of life. Heat creates growth. The planet's nowhere near as warm as it has been in the past, etc. He was a very interesting guy, very credible, but again, you don't see him wheeled out on mainstream media very often, do you?
No, he is very knowledgeable. I very much enjoyed listening to him. I've seen him present stuff, and I've read his book. He just knows a ton about this stuff. He does a really good job of refuting every single argument. And that is one thing I enjoy, that there's so many different sub-arguments you can look at in this whole climate crisis thing. You can look in detail about the polar bears and at the Great Barrier Reef and crop yields and hurricanes, just tons of different rabbit holes you can go down. And I feel like I have been down every single one of them, and there's nothing alarming going on in any one of them, which makes sense. Just the weather, there's been bad weather every single year in human history, and lots of it, and it's no better or worse than it used to be right now.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned hurricanes there. I visited New Orleans in 2014, and saw a lot of what was still the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina a decade beforehand. I don't recall there being much conversation around that event regarding climate change. But now we can barely have a hot day without it blamed on humanity somehow. I also studied politics at university from 2005 to 2009. And I really don't recall any conversation about a climate crisis then either. I mean, that would have also been roughly the same time Al Gore was at the height of his Inconvenient Truth release. I think it was 2007 or something.
Right around there, yeah. You're saying in college they were not talking about it much then?
No, there wasn't much debate about climate change. It was, there was domestic and international politics, but it wasn't like, it's not like a dominant topic like it is now. For example, I mean, I've said it before. You should never take anything The Guardian says as any sort of value, but like every day, the main page of The Guardian is something complaining about the climate. I mean, there was one the other day that's just looking at it here. It says warning of unprecedented heat waves as El Nino set to return in 2023. Just refresh the page and see what rubbish they're saying today. But yeah, the point being, the debate seems to have changed. I mean, where's this agenda come from? Because it seems to be a top-down thing instead of being like a grassroots thing for people to worry about.
Yeah, I don't know who's pushing it the most. I mean, we hear so much nowadays about the WEF pushing it. I think that's a big part of it. Bill Gates himself, I think, is funding The Guardian. He's spending a lot of money, I think, to push this narrative. And the Democratic Party over here in the U.S. is very much pushing it. Even the Republican Party, though, lots of people are not, they don't have the guts to push back against it here. So it just seems like, the media in general, BBC, et cetera, seems to be almost 100% on board with it. But I am encouraged that there's so many people that are on Twitter, for example, and blogging, et cetera, that are just tearing apart all the narratives, all the details, because none of it holds water. That's the fun part about it. You mentioned heat waves, like it's the planets or the heat records are just not happening like they're supposed to be. In the U.S., there's just tons of heat records from the 1930s that are still standing. And, for each state in the U.S., for the 50 states, each one of them has their own heat record, the hottest day on record. And something like 38 of those were set decades ago. A lot of them were set in the 1930s and 1940s. So this whole idea that it's supposed to get way warmer and we're going to be setting all the records, it's absolutely not happening. So the data doesn't back it up. And it's fun for me that you don't need to be a climate scientist or a physicist even to figure this out. You can just look at the data, just look at the temperature data, and you can see that the heat that they're selling is not happening.
Yeah, absolutely. The science is certainly, the mainstream science is certainly debunkable from our point of view. I see that we have Lois Perry in the chat. I will just bring her in there. 2 seconds.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Great. How are you?
Good. How are you? How are you?
Yeah, I just come in to say hi to you guys because Matthew very kindly invited me. Just to say hello. I'm shooting up to London, and then I'm going up to the north of England to do a really big documentary on fracking and talking to people up there. So yeah, but I wanted to come in and say hello at the very least. So here I am. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic.
Well, thanks for joining us. Just for anyone who's unfamiliar, this is Lois Perry. She's one of the most prominent voices on the skeptical side of the climate crisis in the UK, often appearing on GB News, Talk TV, but also the director of CAR26, which stands for Climate Analysis and Reason. I asked this to Tom earlier, and I'm curious for your answer, but why is the climate crisis fraud your hill to die on?
For me, it's nothing to do with the climate and everything to do with individual liberty. And it's just another thing that can be used to take away our freedoms and, to send us back to, peasantry, really, back to the feudal system. We'll be in 15-minute zones and we will be happy, We'll be looking at our screens. We won't be able to drive anywhere or do anything. Or if we do, we'll be in an electric vehicle, which it can be remotely controlled and disabled. It's basically like driving a massive iPad. We won't be doing much anyway because our homes won't be very warm. So we'll probably be in one room with a blanket. and only having one bowl of washing up water for the whole day. One of the things I'm going to be doing in my documentary is talking to people in the north of England, where fracking, for example, would bring lots of jobs, prosperity, and also would lower energy bills for them in the immediate future, and for everyone in the medium to long term future. People who are literally sitting in one room with a blanket on them. This isn't me, just trying to be funny. These are people who all their kids are in one bed, not because they haven't got other beds, but for warmth. This is happening right now, and it's ridiculous. We've got all this cheap and plentiful energy under our feet. We've got coal, we've got gas, it's all there, it's all cheap. And as I say, you can only assume that there is a very sinister agenda at play if we're not exploiting it, basically. So yeah, it's a libertarian issue for me.
Yeah, I had just asked Tom about the what he thinks accounts for the fact that it seems to be a top-down agenda as opposed to like a grassroots movement. I mean, obviously we've got the Just Stop Oil people. Do you have that in?
Funded by oil.
Sorry.
Funded by oil money, Getty money.
Yeah, it's an irony that makes little sense, unless it's to intentionally make climate protesters look absurd. But is one thing.
Well, my belief is that it's to keep that they're actually campaigning for no new oil and gas exploration. Well, who benefits the most? It's the people that have the current ones. The price going up. So yeah, it does make sense. Tom, I hope you don't mind me gate crashing your podcast.
It's not my podcast, no problem.
I know your interview. You don't mind, do you?
Nope, not at all. I'm happy that you're here.
Oh, good. I feel a bit bad. I won't be. I'll be gone soon. Sorry. Okay.
No, it's all good. I thought it'd make it even more interesting just having a couple of different voices on. You were just saying about new exploration. I mean, I live in Aberdeenshire, and we've got a bit of a noticeable decline in general. I mean, a lot of industrial units are sitting empty. The city centre's looking a bit bleak. I don't know if you've been up here before. Possibly.
Whereabouts are you?
Aberdeenshire.
Aberdeenshire. Yes, I have. Unfortunately, the story you're telling is all over the United Kingdom, isn't it, at the moment? And obviously, it's emphasised in areas that had issues beforehand, and the high street is dying. It's very, very depressing. But then you've got councils in trying to make it as difficult as possible for people to drive. I mean, it's a lot of Aberdeenshire. Is it rural, or is it mainly?
Yeah, it's quite rural. I mean, Aberdeen itself. It's quite urban. I mean, there's obviously all the oil and gas infrastructures here.
Yeah.
And we seem to be operating at about a quarter of the late 90s drilling peak. And
which is madness, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's having a noticeable decline in the rest of the city and the area. I mean, Tom will probably appreciate, like what happened to Detroit after the car industry disappeared. And like, I have half an eye on, like, I can see that happening to this area, certainly. Lois, where do you think we'll be in terms of offshore domestic drilling policy in 5 years' time?
Christ, you could have warned me about that question.
Sorry. No, I was just...
I don't know. I mean, the way politics are at the moment, who knows? The thing is, though, I'm hopeful that at some point it's going to get so ludicrous what's going on that the backtracks will have to start happening on all of the oil and gas exploration in the United Kingdom, because we're so at the mercy at the moment of international events, and we just don't need to be. I mean, Tom, the US at the moment, for all of its mad stuff that's going on, the same as here, at least you're fracking, aren't you?
Right. That's what I hear. Yeah,
we're not. And we really, really should be. And one of the things I'm going to do in my documentary, which is going to be called Lois Goes North, is I'm going to be visiting the new coal mine site that's been built. I'm going to be talking to fracking companies, and and as I say, talking to local people about how they feel about everything. I'm also going to a football match as well, which would be interesting. They've made a football kit for me and my name on the back. I hope they don't make me wear it because it's freezing at the moment.
Is it Newcastle by any chance?
No, I don't know. It's one of the big, small teams, if that makes sense. I've got it written down somewhere. But the answer to your question is, I don't know. I really don't know. We should be doing as much oil and gas exploration as possible, and hopefully, one day we will be. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how familiar Tom is with domestic UK politics or the internal mechanisms of it, but are you aware of the Scottish independence movement?
No. Nope.
Okay, so basically it's a bit like, let's say Texas wanted to secede from the United States, but we have within Scotland like a devolved government run by a nationalist political party, the Scottish National Party. So it's like having a pro-secessionist governor of Texas, for example, let's just say. So anyway, the point being, the original independence debate was built around the economic ownership of the North Sea oil and global prices sitting at well over $100 a barrel. And the SNP is essentially attempting to shut down drilling here entirely now. So I'm unsure exactly how they can make any logical economic argument for independence. I mean, it seems as though Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, she's been trying to catch the eye of like higher ups for a long time. She's met with Bill Gates. She's met with Hillary Clinton. She did a tour of the US Capitol with Nancy Pelosi. She allowed Devi Schreider to be the COVID advisor. Hosted COP26 in Glasgow. I mean, I can't help think she's looking at Davos just now this week and wondering why she didn't get an invite like Keir Starmer did. But
yeah.
What do you make of the Scottish government's policies? I no longer understand who they're actually meant to be for, but you could probably say the same about a lot of political parties. I mean, certainly they remind me of the Democrat Party in the United States. They're implementing the same things across the board, not just in climate, but I mean, recently with the trans debate as well.
Yeah.
And that seems to have...
Is that for me?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what do you make of the Scottish government's policies?
All right. Well, I'm going to answer this question, and then I'm going to say goodbye to you, gentlemen. And because this is Tom's thing, and also I've got to get up to London. Okay, I think that she is a pawn in the globalist agenda, which includes all of these insane policies to do with trans and COVID and climate and everything, which is actually just about the complete and utter breakdown of the fabric of society, the fabric of the family, us having autonomy over our own children as parents, allowing a 4-year-old to be able to change their gender without their parents' permission, using extreme totalitarian legislation, using climate or pandemics as the excuse. She wants to leave the United Kingdom so she's not bound or restricted by us. Like, for example, we are blocking her trans thing at the moment, and she wants to leave us and then join the EU. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Either you want to be told what to do or you don't. No, she wants to be told what to do by somebody else. So she's been a very good girl at the moment, doing everything the globalists want her to do, hopeful that they'll let her come and play at their house, and they haven't. Isn't that marvelous? They haven't invited her, even though she's done everything they want. She's like the girlfriend who does everything perfectly and he's still not interested. Anyway, so yeah, I just think she's a pawn in a very, very big game. And but they'll dump her like they just got rid of Jacinda Ardern. She'd lost her she'd lost the public support. She's no longer helpful. Out. Yeah, and that will probably happen to Nicola Sturgeon at some point. I mean, actually, Nicola Sturgeon is quite good because the longer she's leader in Scotland, the more the amount of people that want to actually be independent in Scotland decreases. So she's becoming so unpopular now that my nan calls her the mighty midget, but that's probably not very politically correct.
Yeah, but it almost doesn't matter is the problem though, because I mean the alternatives aren't going to, certainly within the climate debate. I mean, you've got Sunak, who's essentially following the same agenda anyway. I mean,
Well,
at best,
he's a globalist financier. I mean, he used to work for
Yeah.
Goldman Sachs. He's got, I said this recently, and it got 1 million hits. It's amazing on GB News. But I said that there has been a coup. There has been a globalist coup, and I said it hasn't happened with troops on the ground, but insidiously by placing sleeper agents in governments and then waking them up, which is essentially what I think happened with Sunak. We've got a one-party state at the moment, and it's pretty scary. It really is. At least in America, the Republicans are in opposition. We don't have
some of
any
them. Some of them.
Am I right in my assessment of that, or not, Tom?
Yeah, there's some of them. I mean, I would like to see them push back way more than they are pushing back.
Right.
At least there's some pushback. Yep.
There is well, it's zero here, unfortunately, apart from loudmouth Essex girls like me on TV and radio, trying to do my best. But
somebody's got to, speak up for it, because like you say, it does feel like, I mean, sometimes we do sound a bit mad, saying like, oh, globalist coup and blah blah blah, but like I can't unsee it now.
No,
do you know what I mean? Like
Nigel
certainly
Farage said exactly the same thing, and I mean he's quite careful now with what he says, because he has to traverse a line. He's got a big show, massive show every day on Monday to Thursday at 7:00 on GB News, and he can't be seen to be going that too much one way or the other. But even he said this is a coup. This is a coup. Make no mistake.
On the other end of the spectrum, I mean, I quite like George Galloway, and he says the same stuff now as well.
Yeah,
and and you'd expect him to be, given his ties and his past, he's the antithesis of Farage in theory, but they've both come kind of full circle, and they're both kind of saying the same thing.
Well, it's like proper traditional Labour people, politicians and stuff. Even Jeremy Corbyn was wanted to leave the European Union, because if you have your own autonomy, then you're in a better position to protect your own workers' rights. You can make steel in Britain with British workers, and it's better for working people. Ultimately, the whole globalist thing is good for the upper and middle classes. Generally, they get cheaper cleaners and things like that. So the working class people always lose out from things, globalist agendas like the EU and stuff like that. But anyway, I'm going to go now, guys. I hope I've been all right.
No, perfect. Thanks for dropping in.
Thank you, and thanks, Tom. Sorry for butting in. I'm going now.
No problem. Good to see you. I hope to see you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye. See you later.
See you later. Bye. Yeah, she had been saying earlier when she was on my podcast that they were going to start fracking in the UK, but I guess that didn't happen yet, or what?
I think Liz Truss said they were going to go for it, and then they reversed it the second she got chucked out.
That sounds right.
I mean, I'm not entirely sure what the point of Liz Truss was. I mean, I think she'd just been installed when you and Lois did your episode together.
Yes. Yep.
At that point, and it occurred to me quite sharpish afterwards that she was there to expose to the general public that the idea of tax cuts ever again in the future aren't going to happen. And that, I think she was tied up with I think they put her out there and attached a load of policies that they don't actually want to do to her, made her the clown, and said, look how bad she is, look at these mad ideas, you can't have her and you can't have this. Out she goes along with all those ideas. It's a one way of doing things, unfortunately. But
she was in for 40 days or something, wasn't it? Very short,
something like that. Record-breaking,
yeah,
pointless kind of length of time. Have you got any in the US? There, do you have any governors or senators that are really pushing back against this? I mean, like people like DeSantis or Matt Gaetz. What do they say? I've not really heard them speak on this.
I haven't heard much from them. I've heard a little skepticism, I think, from DeSantis. There's one guy named, he's a representative named Thomas Massey, and he's been pushing back. I like to follow him on Twitter. He's a really smart guy, and he knows why this is or he knows the details about the scam and that it's a crock. He's about my favorite politician over here in terms of skepticism. But
where's he from?
Kentucky, I'm going to guess. Not sure. Maybe Kentucky. Somewhere around there.
Yeah, that could be about right. Yeah, possibly. What was I going to ask you next? Yeah, so before Lois came in, we were kind of on a roll about other bits and pieces. We're kind of heading towards the science of it. I mean, I've tried to wrap my head around some of the science your guests have presented, but I absolutely do not have a scientific background. I'm not scientific in the slightest. Most of the general public aren't scientific either, which I think I would suggest that is what the propaganda of the whole climate crisis entirely relies on. That the same as the COVID crisis entirely relied on the general public not understanding or questioning or just taking the word of the authority of the media and the government specialists, let's say. Are you familiar with the recently released House of Lords in the UK document, which outlines some of the? So there was a document released recently. It basically outlines what they want to do in terms of like tackling the climate things. Like Lois mentioned, 15-minute cities, this sort of thing, and it specifically says in this document we should look to the success of the COVID campaign and continue. Continue using the carrot and stick approach with in the climate situation. So, I mean, we've got that to look forward to. I think quite a lot of people were calling this out, like 2 years ago. Like, do you remember when lockdown initially started? And the streets would be empty, and on the news you'd see like deer roaming around cities, and they'd say, "Oh, nature's back because we're not there anymore," and all this kind of total rubbish. But so the question is, where does there's the infamous 97% of scientists figure that's thrown around a lot, saying like 97% of scientists agree that man is to blame for climate change. I mean, where does that number actually come from, and how many scientists actually agree that man-made climate change is causing global warming?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of tremendously bogus studies that they're saying that 97% of scientists believe in it, but there's really no backing for that. There's, let's see, I think at some point they found 75 of 77 scientists agreed that most of the warming was caused by humans or something, out of a huge sample size of people who most of the scientists didn't respond at all. It was just a little tiny sample. But the major point is that I do think that there is some consensus that if we emit more CO2, if you keep everything else equal, we should get some warming. I would say most scientists believe that much of it, that the climate is very complex, but if you kept everything else the same and you emitted a bunch of CO2, we should see some warming. I think that's as far as the consensus goes. And I'm not even sure that, as far as I know, that the net impact of humans on the planet is warming. I'm not even sure personally, after all the study I've done, that even that is true, because humans do a lot of things that could both cool or warm the planet. But whatever we're doing, it's not having much of an impact, because we've been emitting CO2, lots of it, for 200 years, especially in the last maybe 15 or 20 years. But even then, the Earth has not warmed very much at all. So we're kind of running the experiment. We're emitting lots of CO2 and seeing what happens. And it has not warmed very much since the Little Ice Age. So since 1850, it really was cold. It's warmer now. It's warmer since 1975. That is also true, but it's not much warmer. And since maybe 2016 or so, it hasn't warmed at all. There's been a couple of mysterious hiatus periods, even in the last 25 years. And nobody really knows what caused those. There are a bunch of papers that caused that hiatus. I don't know if you're familiar with the one that occurred from, let's call it 97 to 2014 or so. There was not much warming then. Then there was a little warming after that. But then again, in the last 7 or 8 years, there hasn't been much warming again. And so my general thing I like to say on Twitter a lot is nobody really understands it for sure. There's been all these warmings and coolings, even in the last 500 years. And there's a bunch of explanations, but nobody knows for sure, and nobody knows enough to predict what's going to happen next. Quite a few people are predicting cooling between now and 2050. Some people are predicting warming, and I think we're just going to have to wait to see what happens. I don't think it's going to be a drastic difference either way.
Yeah, I mean, some of the presentations that we receive, where we're told that various places are going to be, under 10 foot of water and this sort of thing. I mean, obviously, in the past, I mean, if you look at geological evidence, I mean, the water levels have changed, but I mean, you're looking at events like asteroids and meteors hitting, and also, I mean, what do you make of like natural cycles in the Earth? Like the Earth just doing its thing, because obviously you see maps which people produce of like all the tectonic plates been together in one giant landmass. I mean, how like I hesitate to say some of this stuff for sounding mad.
Go ahead.
How do they really know that that's what the Earth looked like then?
Yeah, great question. I mean, there's a lot of things to discuss here. There's so many different cycles. That's one reason why the climate is so incredibly complex, because there's so much stuff going on. There's volcanoes. There's tons of underwater volcanoes. We don't even know where they all are. That some people say that's a pretty big deal in heating up ocean water. Possibly there's so many of them that might make a major difference on how hot the ocean is. And there's all sorts of cycles going on outside of the Earth. There's the sun is not just a constant up there that's doing the same thing every day. There's major cycles in the sun. The Earth is moving through the galaxy, and there's a lot of people who say that our position in the galaxy makes a big difference as to how many cosmic rays we're getting. That is another thing that's changing. So many different things are happening. Humans have some effect. Like I say, animals have an effect. If like beavers have some effect. If we're trying to just say, let's get rid of everything that has an effect on the climate, then we have to get rid of all life on Earth, because everything we're doing, they talk about a butterfly flapping its wings eventually can cause the weather to change. So the only way we could eliminate our impact, the human impact completely, is to just eliminate humans. And I think there is kind of an anti-human, effort going on here. But to get back to the cycles, I don't know if you've watched many of my podcasts, but there are a lot of people who've looked back and seen various cycles of both short-term and long-term cycles. There's an 11-year solar cycle. There's a 230-year cycle. And there's all these different cycles. And I think at some times these cycles are all in sync, and then we get a real warm period for a short period of time. And then if the cycles are in a sync in the other direction, we can get a cold period. But it's very complicated. And the whole idea, you can't even really answer the question, is the Earth warming or cooling right now? Because it has been cooling since, let's say, 2017. It has warmed since 1975. It's warmed since 1850. I think it's cooler since 1100. You can go on and on. Depending on whichever starting point you use, you can find all sorts of arguments that it's either warming or cooling, depending on which starting point you use.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can manipulate statistics for almost any purpose in whichever side of the argument you're on, so I mean it truly is impossible to know.
I do want to stress, I'm sorry, I do want to stress that point again, though. The whole idea that the Earth is too warm now, that is a major thing that we should stress more. This whole idea that it's too warm and the weather is worse right now, that part of it, which is a key part of the whole argument, is absolutely not true. That if you look at, there's a site called Our World in Data. I don't know if you spent a lot of time looking out there, but it's just got tons of data on everything, on poverty and crop yields, and it just human health, and it's just got tons of information out there, and you can look at it any way you want. And you can find out that, look at poverty, for example. Things are supposed to be getting worse and people are in poverty because there's more natural disasters, etc. But if you look at that data, that's not backed up at all. Global poverty has just plunged. So the whole idea, if we emit CO2 and things are going to get worse, it's just not happening. So nowhere is that happening.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned natural disasters there.
Yes. Yeah.
I think I picked a tweet off. You might have shared it. Was it Dr. Matthew? Is it Wilecki?
Yeah, I'm having him on my podcast soon, next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
He tweeted out, I know that it feels like there are more extreme weather events than natural disasters. That's because despite their slight decline in the last 2 decades, growth in population results in more people being affected, and our interconnectedness means you hear and see them all. I mean, I would probably tend to agree with that. I mean, you could turn on the news and watch any number of natural disasters that you wouldn't have been aware of,
Yes.
prior to the internet. How could you have been? It would maybe make the papers a week after it had happened in rural Pakistan or.
Yeah, that is a great point. That is one of the most important points, I think, because it's a big planet and there's going to be bad weather happening, a lot of it. If you scour the entire planet and let us know what the worst flood is right now or the worst drought or whatever, really bad storms, there's tons of bad stuff happening all the time. I just saw in some newspaper report, experts are predicting more extreme weather in 2023, but that's the most easy prediction to make in the world because, of course, there's going to be enormous amounts of bad weather every single year that humans are still on Earth. There's going to be tons of bad weather. And the whole idea that CO2 is causing it is just a non-starter, not true.
Yeah, I mean, so we mentioned whilst Lois was on about the Just Stop Oil movement in the UK. Do you have, in America, are there climate protesters? I mean, you seem to have protesters for everything else. So
not so many. I mean, there was a Fridays for Future thing where they globally they had protests. I actually went to one just to observe it. This was in like September of 2019. So there were people marching around carrying anti-capitalist placards and stuff. But there hasn't been the Just Stop Oil. I haven't heard much about that here. They did have a little bit of those people who were going around and they were deflating tires on SUVs, whatever that was called. We just had a little bit of that in the U.S., maybe in the last 6 months or so. But in general, I haven't seen the people sitting on the streets and blocking major roads much, maybe a time or two, but not so much of that here. Yeah, I don't know.
Does it come from more of, like a younger generation type thing when it does happen?
It seems so, and I do think that it's because of all the brainwashing. I've talked to some young folks. I just had somebody on my podcast talking about in high school they saw Inconvenient Truth several times. I've heard about people seeing it when they were maybe 14 years old. They're showing that movie to them in several different classes at school, not just in science class, but they're just getting this propaganda rammed down their throat. So I do think some of the kids sincerely believe that they're fighting for their lives, and they're holding up signs that say, you will die of old age, but I will die of climate change. And that is just complete insanity. And if kids actually believe that, and then they believe their future is so dire that they shouldn't study or they shouldn't get married or whatever, I think that's a really evil thing to sell this dystopian future to the kids for no good reason. I think that's an evil thing to do, but it has been happening. I don't know how much longer it can go on, though. I am hopeful that it's not going to go on another 10 years. I think people are waking up. I really do.
I do hope so, but like you say, it's the brainwashing has been quite strong. I mean, to me, it's like the climate thing seems to be like this generation's like nihilistic fight. Like in combination with like a general decline in culture and whatnot. I mean, and also I think how to put this, all the rights and equality movements have essentially been legally completed in the West.
Yes,
I would say. So they've moved on to like more and more extreme issues. I mean, it's like the thing with the climate. The dog's on the move. Hey, buddy.
Very nice.
The thing with the climate debate is like you say, you can prove it either way using statistics, but not actually know what will happen in the future. So it's easy for them to go out and say, "Oh, I'm fighting for climate change," and nobody can ever give them what they're looking for or deny them what they're looking for, if that makes sense. Whereas, you can rewind to the suffragettes or the civil rights movement in America, and there's like a clearly defined goal there. But I mean, what is the clearly defined goal of young nihilistic generation that doesn't believe in anything anymore?
Yeah, I think I've heard some people say that we just don't have enough real problems right now, so we're making up to make our lives more interesting. We're making up problems. I think that is part of it, possibly. I do think, though, as time goes on and the climate crisis or the climate disasters continue to not get worse, that at some point people are, even the believers, are just going to kind of forget that they believed. I do think 20 years from now, a lot of people who are believers today will not remember that they were believers, and they'll look back on it and saying, I never really did believe in it. I think people are going to forget kind of how panicked they were as time goes on. I don't think in 20 years they're going to be happy about marching for climate in 2023. We'll see.
I'd hope so, but well, yeah. I mean, people have already forgotten how they behaved during the pandemic.
They are.
Incredibly
Good
enough,
point.
you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'd just like to point out, it's probably climate anxiety that's given so many people heart attacks. Wink.
Yeah.
But
Well,
so to completely flip this on its head, have you considered that some of the weather events may be man-made, but in a nefarious manner, like weaponry, for example? There's the long-rumored HARP weather machine. I'm sure you've probably gone down that rabbit hole. China cloud seeded during the Olympics. Was that 2008, possibly?
sounds right. I don't know.
Beijing, yeah. And as far back as Vietnam, there was weather weapons in use, I believe, by the United States military. Yeah, Saudi Arabia as well. There was stuff in the news a couple of years back that they actually created rain to try and solve a drought problem, which I think was roughly the same time that there was some mass flooding that hit Turkey, I think, which isn't that far away in the grand scheme of things on the map. So have you considered that some of the more extreme weather could be man-made, but not CO2?
I haven't really been far down that rabbit hole. I have not. Whatever they're doing, though, it's not making the weather worse than it used to be. Maybe they're causing, I don't know. Are people saying that local storms are caused by humans? I've not heard that. Or changes in rain, at least, I guess. I've heard about the changes in rain, but not actual like a thunderstorm caused by humans. I've not heard that.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I think there's some chemical that you can release into the atmosphere, which then increases like the electricity and the instability. Like I say, I'm not scientifically minded, and this is certainly far more in the conspiracy realm of the whole debate. But I just was curious if you'd
One interesting thing that did come up on my podcast, I had the Connollys. It's a father-son team. They were both on my podcast. Willie Suen referred to them as geniuses, and I think they are geniuses, very smart. And I believe it was Michael Connolly was saying that there is an impact on rain by wind turbines, because you put up wind turbines in an area where there weren't wind turbines before. They have a fairly major effect because they are changing the winds. So downstream or downwind of the wind turbines, there can be changes in rain. I forget if it's less or more. But anyway, there's this whole idea that if we don't want to affect the weather, let's put up wind turbines. But it might ironically turn out that wind turbines might have more effect on local weather than CO2 does. I wouldn't doubt that at all. So it's something to think about.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I just to round off on that particular bit. I mean, I would be curious if you could speak to somebody on your podcast specifically about the intentional weather manipulation. That'd be quite interesting to see how it possibly fits into the broader climate debate. What do you make of the not just the, let's say, the propaganda of the facts and figures that are thrown out there about the climate crisis, but what do you make of the intentionally like provocative language that's used against people who aren't all aboard? Let's say like the word denialism is used quite often. You're a climate denier if you don't believe in it, and I mean that's obviously intentionally used to evoke Holocaust denial, I would suggest. I think they're trying to wrap those two issues like subliminally together. I mean, recently, I don't know if you would have seen this in the British Parliament. There's an MP called Andrew Bridgen who, I mean, this is completely off topic, but it's kind of makes the same point. He's kind of gone all in on the vaccine debate, saying that they're harming people and whatnot. And he quoted a doctor on his Twitter account, and the quote that he'd said was, "I recently spoke to a doctor and he told me that the mass vaccination program is the worst thing that's happened to humanity since the Holocaust." And then all the other MPs all got up and said that he was being anti-Semitic, and it was, it's yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the same kind of like trick that's been played here, I think, by calling people climate deniers or you're climate denialism. It's intentionally trying to tar people with the mad brush instead of opening opening things up for scientific debate. I mean, it is curious. I'd be curious to like look back through history and work out exactly when we stopped talking about things and just started calling each other lunatics. Because, I mean, maybe it was around the time of Kennedy's assassination, possibly when they invented the conspiracy theorist term. But
interesting you bring that up, because there's a guy named Hugo Kruger, and I think he is saying that the term conspiracy theorist was not used until the Kennedy assassination, and then it was used to tar people who had any questions about it as a conspiracy theorist. I think that is what he said. I haven't really dug into that very much, but yeah. So there's this whole effort everywhere, I think, to tar people who are digging into anything as, oh, they're crazy, don't listen to them, or they're evil and or crazy, both of those things. And I think it's just an effort to not talk about the actual issues. It's just, let's tar the people, and hopefully if we cancel them, then we won't have to talk about their issues. I think there's a lot of that. And I totally agree with what you said about deniers. I think that is an effort to lump us in with Holocaust deniers, which like Tony Heller is, I don't know if you know Tony Heller, climate skeptic Tony Heller. He's supposed to be a Holocaust denier and anti-Semitic, but he says, I am Jewish, so, I'm probably not anti-Semitic. It's just, yeah. Again, they just don't want to hear what he has to say. He's just doing brilliant work looking at the data and pointing out that there's nothing wrong with the weather. He's maybe the best I know in the whole debate at doing that kind of thing. He's fantastic.
Yeah, I'll look him up, definitely. I mean, are you I seen the news coming out of America last week. Will you be throwing out your gas stove anytime soon? Or
I don't think so. I heard that the administration sent that out as a trial balloon, and then they backed away from it. Hopefully they're not going to push that one, because I don't think it got a lot of derision, and I think it's completely crazy. But it really did roll out. I don't know if it rolled out worldwide at the same time. Just all of a sudden, we heard it everywhere. It was interesting as to exactly who was behind the push to demonize gas stoves. Did you hear much in your neck of the woods about that?
No, nobody's mentioned it, but we have different like there's a thing to try and get rid of gas boilers for heating homes. Likewise, oil central heating, which is quite prominent in rural areas of this country, certainly.
But is the sales pitch, though, let's get rid of it and it's going to prevent bad weather in 2050? Because that seems to be the major thing.
Yeah, it's certainly connected. I mean, we, like our government, both of our governments, like I said, because we're in Scotland, we have this devolved government just beneath the main Westminster government. And both governments talk about net zero. Everything's net zero. Everything's either we have to do this for net zero or we have to do this for Ukraine. One or the other.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
And it's exactly the same nonsense that you'll hear out of the Democrats and a lot of the Republican Party in America. It's as Lois said, there is something pulling the strings here. I mean, do you believe in the grand conspiracy as epitomized by the World Economic Forum?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a grand conspiracy, but I don't trust the people that are meeting at the WEF meeting. I trust 0% of those people that they have my best interests at heart. I mean, there was just a picture on Twitter of somebody from the IMF that was talking to the UN chief at the WEF meeting. And the whole idea that all those people are going to get together and do stuff to make my life better, I absolutely don't believe that. I think they're getting so much pushback, though. And like Bill Gates didn't show up there. I don't know who else didn't show up there. It seems like this year WEF is way less popular among people that are talking about it in my world than it was last year. I think, I remember the meetings in Davos. I was kind of thinking, I was kind of thinking that these are people who know what they're talking about and they know what's best for us. I kind of thought that not that long ago, but now I completely have flipped on that. I don't know. And they're getting a ton of pushback from Rebel News. I don't know if you saw the Rebel News guy talking to the CEO of Pfizer and asking all those tough questions. I mean, those Rebel News guys are doing a great job. They're doing a great job of asking questions that other journalists are not asking. So,
I mean, one of the main good things to consider is the amount of independent media that is trying to push back against this. But I think there's a narrow window of opportunity for the nefarious actors to take full control of everything. I think it is probably narrowing as we speak. But it depends on the young people, like you say, if they've the young people, obviously glued to the phones and whatnot. If they can maintain their access to alternative information, then we should be okay. I mean, the let's say the older generations who will exclusively watch CNN or the BBC here or whatever, I mean, they're not safe. I would say, unfortunately, there's not much chance of changing their minds on it. To come to our worldview would be that much of a massive change, having been around for let's say 70, 80 years, thinking X, Y, and Z, that it's just not going to happen at this point. So it will all boil down to the children. Unfortunately, I do think they've realized that, and that's why they are using younger and younger people as part of the propaganda push. I mean, you only need to look at. He's on the move again. What are you doing?
So
dog butt. You only need to look at Greta Thunberg, for example, or the latest. Who's it? I've seen Antonio Gutierrez, the UN climate advisor. He had the head of the UN, Antonio Gutierrez. He had his new climate advisor. Was it Sofia Chiana?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, seen her hanging off him in a few pictures, and you just kind of look at that and you think, oh dear, is that a good look? Like, really, is that a good look? What's going on there? I mean, she's certainly not thick either. She's a very intelligent young lady, but she's been wheeled out there for a reason.
Yeah, I don't know if she is supposed to be the new Greta. I've heard quite a few people say that Greta kind of aged out and now needs somebody else. I don't know. It is amazing though, if you look at her social media, how much flying she's done. I mean, she's supposed to be the UN climate champion, and she's just been flying all over the place. And it just seems like an odd way for someone to behave if they actually really believe that they were killing poor people by doing that. You think that they would find a way to not fly around. So I think that's a really good point that we can use constantly, is to just talk about the hypocrisy and all the private jets flying into Davos. And if they actually believe it, why are they're flying in via private jet and taking the helicopter and then taking an SUV. Some are using all three forms of transport to get there. And supposedly their menu contains meat. There's this whole idea we're supposed to be eating bugs, but they're eating the meat, saving that for themselves.
Yeah, I actually ate some bugs on my last podcast, unfortunately, just to prove a point.
You did?
Okay. But I've it wasn't that bad, to be honest. But I've actually gone full carnivore recently.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Yeah, and I feel much better than ever. And it's very, very obvious that, red meat is what we should be eating. And did you see that? There was that chart that was released recently. I think it might have been from your Department of Health, possibly, that was trying to say what foods you should and shouldn't be eating. And then up at the top, it was like chocolate-covered Cheerios are good for you, and red meat and eggs and stuff. You should try and limit these in case you're ill. And you're like, what? Who's written this crap? And for people to then go along with it. I mean, if that doesn't expose everything, all you need to do is just read that and just go, oh, okay, they're trying to kill us.
Yeah, I think so. Are you a fan of this Bitcoin guy? His name is Saifedean Ammous, Ammous.
No, can't say I've heard of him.
Yeah, he runs the Bitcoin Standard podcast. He had me on his podcast. He is a very solid climate skeptic, very smart guy. But he is heavily, I believe, into carnivore, into eating meat, and he looks and feels great. He's says whatever, all this. He's saying a lot of the same things you're saying about how we're supposed to be eating Cheerios or whatever the corporates are pushing at us. That's not the way to get healthy. Meat is a better way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I was curious, who have you got coming up on your podcast? Have you got a little list of people that
I do have a little list.
Interested in?
Let me take a look here if you have a minute. Where is it? I have one guy from Twitter named Dale Johnson. I don't think you know him. There's a Twitter account called Dawn that does a lot of really good pushing back against the climate scam. He's going to be on. Donna Laframboise, she wrote a book called about the IPCC about 10 years ago. She's a great investigative reporter from Canada. She's going to be on. And then I mentioned Matthew Wielicki that you were talking about. He's going to be on. Hugo Kruger, this really bright podcaster from from Africa, I believe. He's going to be on. And let's see. Judith Curry. She's a famous climate scientist. You may have heard about her. She's going to be on March 1. She's one of the most mainstream climate scientists who stood up and said there is no climate crisis. And so that's good. Another guy named Wallace Mannheimer. He also has been writing some good stuff, pushing back in the mainstream media about the climate scam. So yeah, I've got a few people lined up. Really had a good time talking to these people.
Yeah, I can see you enjoy yourself when you're doing them. I've tried to watch as many as I can over the course of the last couple of weeks. I see. I was watching the one where you spoke to Lembit Opik. How did that come about?
How did that come about? He just DM'd me on Twitter. I guess he followed me on Twitter and he liked what he saw. And a lot of the times I've gotten connected with people over Twitter first, and then that's how we've gotten together on a podcast. Yeah. Twitter's been great. Somebody, I don't know if there was an Elon Musk quote saying that Twitter is going to take over, going to replace CNN, something like that. I just saw that today. Somebody was making that claim. I think CNN is closing their headquarters. I don't know if that's true. I saw that on Twitter today. But anyway, regardless, I think there is some truth that I, for one, it would way more like to spend an hour getting my news off of Twitter than from CNN. I don't know what % of people that are below 60 or whatever want CNN as their sole source of information. It seems like Twitter has been fantastic lately. I don't know if you've seen that, but
yeah, I am still inherently skeptical of Elon Musk.
Yes,
ultimately he's the electric car guy, and he's also the guy who wants to put a chip in my brain. So
and a carbon tax.
And you can't. What are you doing, pal? You can't go on about free speech and then change your mind and not bring back certain people. Let's just say Alex Jones, for example. For better or worse, whatever people think of him. If you're the champion of free speech, supposedly, and it's the public forum, then you have to bring everybody back, surely. And also, there's something in the terms and conditions of Twitter that changed recently. It was the whole point was like the change of terms and conditions. So like Alex Jones obviously, again, let's use the word denied Sandy Hook happened. And so they changed a line that said, you are banned if you deny a violent event.
Oh, okay.
And like it said, for example, a mass shooting, the Holocaust, or 9/11. And you're like, what do you mean by denying 9/11 exactly? Because I mean, like, obviously I've spent a lot of time going down the rabbit hole of 9/11, and I don't deny that 9/11 happened. So what exactly are these terms and conditions saying I can't say anymore? Isn't it that might have been some sort of foreknowledge or government involvement? Because that, that's changing the playing field entirely, and that's something that's come in since Elon Musk took over.
Okay. Yeah.
So, like I said, I'm inherently skeptical of Musk. Some things seem to have improved, but I think it might be a bit of a limited hangout.
Okay. I mean, what do you think is going to happen, worst case, in the next few years to Twitter? You think it's going to close up or start banning people, everybody on the right again, or what do you think?
I don't know. I always feel like we're in most issues, most everywhere, on most platforms, we are being herded in one direction or another for something or other. And we keep getting given idols, let's say, for lack of a better word, or heroes. The latest one that everyone's putting their stock in would probably be Ron DeSantis in America. And we seem to be set up for you could make arguments for and against Trump. Certainly, at least he came out of the Paris Climate Accords and whatnot. But then equally, how much difference did he actually make to the broader issues in American society? The Federal Reserve's still there. They were still funding wars, maybe not any new ones, but still bombing Yemen on his watch, etc. So but then that comes back to, like, let's say, like a utopian argument whereby I can sit here and say, well, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem, but in the real world, you can't solve all of those problems. because there's so many actors and special interests. You can only go one at a time. So sometimes some people do some good is probably the best way of putting it. So you could say, like, yeah, Trump did some good, Musk has done some good, but not everybody can be perfect, and I can't necessarily judge them to the standards that I want to hold myself to, which I don't even meet most of the time anyway. So, you know, it's difficult to be. It's a complex world.
It is, yeah, it is. Sounds like you've been way further down the 9/11 rabbit hole than I have. Orders of magnitude. Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, it's probably my it's one of my favorite conspiracies. Let's say it's difficult to say things like favorite when lots of people died, because it's obviously a horrible thing. But you know, it's a very, very interesting. A lot of curiosity surrounding it. That and JFK. I mean, they're the classic conspiracy theories, let's just say. And it depends how much you want to fry your own brain, but I encourage you to go down the rabbit holes there. But I mean, you probably end up expanding your podcast from climate crisis to everything else, but which would be curious.
Yeah. But so far you're on YouTube and not they're not giving you strikes for the things you're talking about yet, or are they?
No, I don't think I'm popular enough as yet. What about you? Have you received any strikes for?
Not yet. Not for YouTube. I've only been on 6 months, and I've kept it pretty limited to climate and energy so far, but no strikes yet.
Yeah, well, that's good. I mean, what's the most popular episode you've done? I think I saw one that topped about 10,000.
Yeah, there's one that with Valentina Zarkova that's near 100,000, maybe 98,000 views or something. Yeah. And just the last week, I had like 15,000 watch hours in the last 7 days. So most days, people are watching for a couple thousand hours or so. So
how did you go that big that quick? I mean, I would suggest. I mean, it's the quality of the guests that you've had is certainly.
Yeah, I think that's
certainly accelerated things.
Yeah, I think that's that's about 100% of it. I've just been lucky enough to have a lot of people who have a lot of climate skeptics who know a lot have been on my podcast, and people are talking about climate and energy. And I guess there's a certain audience of people who love to hear that stuff. Some people are kind of watching all of them. And I was saying before I went into this podcasting that for me, when I would listen to tons of podcasts, but for me, it was audio versus video is like 100 minutes of audio for every 1 minute of video, I would say, my own podcast consumption. So I'm surprised that people are willing to watch long form podcasts about this stuff on YouTube, just because I hadn't done much of that myself.
Yeah, I think people have probably got used to watching things like Joe Rogan, Patrick Bet-David, these types who present good guests. And I mean, as good as audio format is, you know, if you're in the gym or driving or out for a walk, it is very good to listen to. But I don't think you get the full experience without the video, you know, seeing people's faces, and it changes it changes the dynamic of a conversation, but you probably get to know somebody a bit better, certainly from a guest's, from a listener's point of view, or a viewer's point of view. Even you can, I think you get a better feel for how genuine a person is, possibly, by being able to see their face when they're saying these things. I mean,
so I'm curious, do you sit down in front of your computer or TV and just watch a video podcast for an hour straight? Because I'll do that if I'm on a treadmill or doing something else, or riding an exercise bike and then watching it while I'm doing some exercise. But I'm amazed that people have the attention span to just sit in front of their computer and watch a video for an hour straight.
Yeah, I absolutely do. Okay. I mean, I actively prefer it now. I mean, if I'm just taking in the audio of something, I'm probably more disappointed that I'm not able to watch it at the same time. There's some things that that are audio only that I listen to that I would much prefer if I could also see the video. But like you say, it's finding the full time to do that, because you can't watch something when you're out for a walk, or you can't watch something when you're commuting, for example. It makes it a bit more difficult. But no, it's been a very interesting experience, and I've spoken to a lot of interesting people. But I mean, I suppose the difference between mine and yours is you have your niche, and it's working very well for you. And I'm, like I said at the beginning, master of all trades, jack of none, absolute scattergun approach to guests and interests, other than the recent, what I would say, development that everything fits neatly into the World Economic Forum's global conspiracy. They're trying to kill us all. And like climate change certainly fits in there. Where can people find more of your work?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at tan123, like the color tan123. You can kind of find me there. And if you go onto YouTube and search for Tom Nelson Climate, then you can find my YouTube channel. So those are the major places. I just
and you have a blog as well.
I have a blog, yeah, tomnelson.blogspot.com. I have a link tree. I just got a link tree, and you can find that if you get to my YouTube or my Twitter, you can find my link tree. So then the link tree's got everything on there as well. So I do have a Substack that I use a little bit to try to put stuff on there where I think I'm going to get banned elsewhere. I put it on Substack. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll post all the links in the text elements of where this show's released. It was a pleasure talking to you today, Tom. Thanks for joining me. I'll speak to you again soon.
Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate it.
Join us next time for the Political Darkside Podcast.
It's a disaster. Whose idea was that? It's just ridiculous.
Available on iTunes, Google, and Spotify.
For more information, visit politicaldarkside.com.